What would you do if being kind cost you everything and then gave it all back? I want you to think about that for a second, because the story I'm about to tell you isn't from a movie. It's the kind of thing that happens in a Tim Hortons parking lot on a Tuesday morning in November when the sky is the color of old concrete and nobody's watching. It happened to a young woman named Sera Voss, and when I first heard it, I had to sit with it for a while before I understood what it was really about. This is her story, and I promise you, you won't see the ending coming. Sera Voss was 26 years old, 5'3", and had exactly one good blazer to her name. She'd bought it 2 years ago at a value village in Sudbury. Charcoal gray, slightly wide in the shoulders, but clean and pressed the way her grandmother had taught her. She wore it over a white button-down she'd ironed twice that morning because the iron kept spitting rust-colored water and she'd had to start over. Her dark hair was pulled back into something between a bun and a knot, held in place by two bobby pins and sheer determination. She was not the kind of woman who looked like she belonged in a boardroom. She looked like someone's younger sister who'd borrowed someone else's clothes for a job interview, which, in a way, was almost true. The interview was at Caldwell Morrow Financial, one of the oldest private investment firms in Ottawa. 7th floor, glass walls, a receptionist who wore heels indoors. Sera had applied on a whim 3 months ago, honestly expecting nothing. Her resume was thin. A commerce degree from Laurentian, 18 months at a credit union in Chelmsford. A semester abroad she'd paid for herself by working 2 jobs. No connections, no family name that meant anything in those circles. Just a cover letter she'd rewritten 11 times and a quiet, stubborn belief that she was smarter than most people gave her credit for. They'd called her back, then called again. And now, somehow, she was a finalist for a junior analyst position that paid nearly 3 times what she was making. The interview was at 9:30. It was 8:47 when she stepped off the number 95 bus onto Slater Street. She had 43 minutes, plenty of time. She walked 2 blocks, turned left toward the office tower, and that's when she heard it. A sound so small it almost disappeared under the noise of morning traffic. Crying. Not the loud attention-grabbing kind. The other kind. The kind that happens when someone has been crying for a long time and has almost given up on anyone noticing. Sera stopped walking. She stood there on the sidewalk, briefcase in hand, and told herself to keep moving. She was so close. She'd worked so hard to get here. People cried on the street in cities all the time. She was not a social worker. She was not anyone's emergency contact. She was a 26-year-old woman with a Value Village blazer and 42 minutes before the most important interview of her life. She turned toward the sound anyway. He was sitting on the concrete step of a closed pharmacy, tucked between a pillar and a mailbox, as if he'd been trying to make himself as small as possible. A boy, maybe 7 or 8 years old, wearing a too-thin jacket in a shade of blue that had been washed too many times. His sneakers were the wrong size. She could see that from 6 feet away. His hair was damp, not from rain, from crying. He had no bag, no parent visible, no phone. "Hey," Sera said, crouching down to his level without thinking about her blazer or her shoes. "Hey, what's going on? You okay?" The boy looked up at her. He had the kind of eyes that made you feel like you were being measured and found trustworthy at the same time. "I can't find my dad," he said. His voice was completely flat, like he'd already said it 100 times and stopped expecting it to fix anything. Sera looked left, then right. The morning crowd moved around them both the way water moves around a stone, without acknowledging either of them. A man in an expensive coat walked past so close his briefcase nearly grazed her shoulder. He didn't look down. "How long have you been here?" she asked. The boy shrugged. "A long time. Did you call someone?" "My phone died." Sera looked at her watch. 8:51. She thought about the receptionist with the indoor heels. She thought about the 11 drafts of her cover letter. She thought about the look on her mother's face when Sera had told her about the callback. That careful, hopeful look that mothers try to hide when they don't want to put pressure on you and put all the pressure on you anyway. Then she looked at the boy. Okay, she said. What's your dad's name? His name was Felix. Felix Draper. He was 7, not 8. She'd been off by a year. His father's name was Martin, and he had a phone number memorized the way only children taught by worried parents memorize things. Perfectly, completely, like a prayer. Sera called the number from her own phone. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail. She tried again. Same result. Does he work nearby? She asked. Felix nodded. He works in that building. He pointed down Slater toward a tower with mirrored windows, the kind of building that reflected everything and revealed nothing. Which one exactly? The tall silver one. He always says it's the tallest one. Sera looked at her watch again. 8:58. She made a decision she didn't announce and didn't examine too closely, because she knew that if she examined it, she might talk herself out of it. Come on, she said. She stood up and held out her hand. Let's find your dad. Felix took her hand without hesitating, which was the thing she remembered later. The complete trust of it, the way he just reached up and held on like it was the most natural thing in the world. They walked down Slater together, a young woman in a slightly too wide blazer and a small boy with mismatched shoes, while the city moved around them like they were invisible. She kept trying Martin's number. On the third try, a woman answered. Martin's assistant, who sounded immediately panicked. Yes, Martin Draper was in the building. Yes, he'd been looking for his son for 30 minutes. She was calling security now. She was calling. Tell him we're outside the lobby, Sera said. Tell him his son is safe. It took 6 minutes for Martin Draper to get to the lobby doors. Sera had been expecting. She wasn't sure what she'd been expecting. A frantic father. Someone disheveled with panic, tie loosened, calling his son's name. What she got was a man in his late 40s, silver-haired, broad-shouldered, wearing a suit that had clearly been made for him specifically. He came through the lobby doors at a controlled, fast walk. The walk of someone who has trained himself not to run even when every instinct is screaming at him to. When he saw Felix, something happened to his face that Sera couldn't describe exactly. Not relief. More than relief. The look of someone who had spent the last 30 minutes on the wrong side of a door they couldn't open, and the door had just swung wide. He crouched down and pulled Felix into his arms without saying anything. Felix, for his part, buried his face against his father's shoulder and didn't say anything either. They stayed like that for a moment. Sera looked at her watch. 9:17. She was 13 minutes away from the Caldwell Morrow building, which meant she was functionally late. Not catastrophically, but late enough that walking in at 9:32 instead of 9:20 would be noticed. Would be noted. In a place like Caldwell Morrow, being noted for the wrong reasons could close a door before you ever got to open it. She was already pulling out her phone to see if she could call ahead when Martin Draper stood up. He was taller than she'd registered from across the street. He looked at her directly, not past her, not around her, in that way that some people have of making you feel like the only person in a space. You found him, he said. He found me, really, Sera said. He was on Slater, near the pharmacy. He had your number memorized. Smart kid. Martin looked down at Felix, then back at her. You stayed with him. It wasn't quite a question. Well, Sera said, already moving, already calculating. He was 7 and alone in a city. It seemed like the reasonable thing to do. She glanced down the street. I'm sorry, I have somewhere I need to be. Where? She paused, not sure why she was answering. Caldwell Morrow. I have an interview at 9:30. Martin Draper was quiet for exactly 2 seconds. Which position? He said. Sera looked at him. Junior analyst. Why? He didn't answer that. He pulled a card from his breast pocket and handed it to her. Tell them you were with me. Tell them to call this number. Sera looked down at the card. Martin Draper, managing partner, Caldwell Morrow Financial Group. The ground did not literally shift under her feet, but it felt for a moment like it did. She started. Go, Martin said. You've got 12 minutes. She went. She walked fast enough that by the time she pushed through the lobby doors of the Caldwell Morrow building, she was breathing harder than she wanted to be for a job interview. The receptionist. Yes, heels. just as imagined, looked up from the front desk with a politely calibrated expression that said you're almost late without saying a word. Sera Voss, Sera said. 9:30 with the analyst team. I was asked to pass along a message. I was delayed with Martin Draper. He said to call this number. She set the card on the desk. The receptionist looked at the card. Something changed in the receptionist's face. Not dramatically. Just a small recalibration, like a compass needle swinging north. Of course, the receptionist said. I'll let them know you're here. Can I get you anything while you wait? Water? Coffee? Sera sat down in one of the low chairs along the wall and realized her hands were shaking slightly. She pressed them flat against her knees. She thought about the boy's hand in hers, the complete, uncomplicated trust of it. She thought about the 11 drafts of the cover letter. She thought, whatever happens next, I made the right call. The interview lasted an hour and 20 minutes, which was 40 minutes longer than scheduled. There were 3 people in the room. A senior analyst named Carolyn. Not the Carolyn from Sera's past, a different Carolyn entirely. A woman in her 50s with reading glasses and a precise way of asking questions. A younger associate named Patrixiu, and a managing director who introduced herself as Heather Lund and then said almost nothing for the first hour, only watching. They asked about her degree, her time at the credit union, a case study involving a mid-sized manufacturing client and an interest rate hedge that had gone sideways. They asked her to walk them through her reasoning on 3 different hypothetical portfolios. They asked what she would do if she disagreed with a senior colleague's recommendation. Sera answered every question. Not perfectly. She stumbled once on a technical definition, corrected herself, kept going. She knew the stumble was visible and decided the recovery mattered more than pretending it hadn't happened. At the end, Heather Lund, who had been silent for most of the meeting, leaned forward. Martin Draper called ahead, Heather said. He told us what happened this morning. Sera nodded. I hope Felix is all right. Felix is fine, Heather said. He does this. He's 7. His father is working on his situational awareness. A pause. The faintest edge of something that might have been a smile. Martin mentioned that you didn't tell him you were going to an interview until you were already late. I wasn't going to mention it at all, Sera said honestly. There didn't seem to be any point. Heather Lund looked at her for a moment. That's an interesting answer, she said. They called her 3 days later. She was at her desk at the credit union in Chelmsford when her phone rang with an Ottawa number she didn't recognize. She stepped outside into the November cold, standing in the parking lot in her regular work clothes. Not the blazer, just a gray cardigan over a collared shirt, and answered. Carolyn from Caldwell Morrow introduced herself and got directly to the point. The analyst team had made their decision. They were offering Sera the position. The start date was January 6th. The package included a salary she would need to read twice before she believed it, 3 weeks of vacation, and a transit allowance. Sera said thank you. She said she would confirm by the end of the week. She went back inside, sat down at her desk, and for approximately 2 minutes stared at her computer screen without seeing it. Then she went to the bathroom, stood at the sink with both hands on the counter, and let herself feel it. All of it. Every rejected application and every careful budgeted month, and every time she'd sat across from someone whose face said, "You're not quite what we had in mind." Let it move through her and settle and go quiet. When she came back out, her colleague Deb asked if she was okay. Yeah, Sera said. Really good, actually. She didn't explain yet. She wasn't ready to say it out loud. Once you said something out loud, it became real in a different way. And she needed a few more hours of it being just hers. She told her mother that night over the phone, sitting on the floor of her apartment with her back against the couch, because that was where she'd landed when she sat down and she didn't feel like moving. Her mother was quiet for a moment when Sera finished telling her. Then she said, in a voice that was working very hard to sound normal, "That's wonderful, Sera." "I know," Sera said. Another silence. "You helped that little boy," her mother said. "I did, even though you knew you'd be late." I knew I might be late, Sera said. There's a difference. Her mother made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh and wasn't quite crying. That's your grandmother talking. Sera smiled. I know. Here's the part of the story that I keep coming back to. Not the twist, though yes, Martin Draper being a managing partner at the exact firm she was interviewing with is the kind of coincidence that makes you believe, briefly, that the universe has a sense of narrative. Not the job offer. Not even the moment when she stood at that sink in the Chelmsford Credit Union bathroom and finally let herself feel it. I keep coming back to the moment on the sidewalk. 8:51 in the morning, 42 minutes to go, the most important interview of her life within reach, and a small boy crying in a way that was almost too quiet to hear. She stopped. She didn't stop because she thought it would work out. She didn't stop because she calculated the odds of a good outcome. She stopped because a child was alone and frightened, and the world was walking past him like he was a fixture, like he was part of the architecture of the city, like he was someone else's problem. She stopped because it was the right thing to do, and she was the person standing there. That's it. That's the whole of it. I've been thinking a lot lately about the things we talk ourselves out of. The kind gesture that would make us late. The small mercy we set aside because we have somewhere to be. The moment where we could stop and we don't, because the math of our own lives adds up to something that feels more urgent than someone else's distress. And what I want to ask you, really ask you, not just as a rhetorical thing, is this: when was the last time you stopped? Not because it was convenient, not because it would cost you nothing, but because someone needed you to, and you were the person standing there. Sera Voss started at Caldwell Morrow Financial on January 6th. She's been there 2.5 years now. She has a better blazer. She bought it herself, full price from a store downtown. She still has the Value Village one, though. She keeps it in the back of her closet, and sometimes, before important days, she takes it out and holds it for a moment. She and Felix Draper have met twice since that Tuesday morning. The second time he was taller, and he remembered her name without being told. That, she says, is the part that got her, that he remembered. If this story made you feel something, if it reminded you of a moment when someone stopped for you, or a moment when you wish you had stopped, I want to hear about it. Leave it in the comments below. Tell me your story. And if you know someone who needs to hear this today, share it with them. Sometimes the right story at the right time is its own kind of kindness. I'll see you in the next one.